the creative industries, certainly in marketing, advertising, there's still these vestiges of these very 20th century models, from the Mad Men era of this kind of strict distinction that's been breaking down, but we still have these vestiges between like the strategists on one side and the account managers who can talk to clients, and the suits versus the creatives, those weird people that we kind of keep in the back and don't let directly connect with clients. I mean, that's going away, but I think we still have these cultural vestiges of that kind of thing. And I think it's really about reframing it and thinking about, do we treat designers and other creatives as downstream service providers who implement ideas that are being handed to them by the strategists who've come up with the ideas, and the designers are just, the hands to do that? Or are we bringing in designers and other creatives earlier in the process to develop the strategy, to develop the concepts? And there's that kind of collaboration, that dialogue that starts at an earlier point.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I was at Advertising Week recently, and Lee-Sean Huang was there speaking. So wanted to catch up with him and do a podcast. Thanks so much for joining me, Lee-Sean.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. It's a real honor.
So I look back at the AIGA, and it seems to have expanded its membership and mission since the last time I looked, which was probably a dozen years ago. So what's the sort of elevator pitch for the organization today?
Sure. Well, AIGA was originally founded over 100 years ago as the American Institute for Graphic Arts, but we're like IBM, we're just known by the acronym AIGA these days. Our mission is to advance design as a professional craft, strategic advantage, and vital cultural force. So it originally started basically as like a social club for what we now call designers, or typesetters, graphic artists in New York City, publishing and advertising back in the day. But it's since expanded to be sort of a big tent community for people in design. Our primary and sort of original audience was graphic designers, but we also have designers working in tech, so UI, UX designers, service designers, as well as just fans of design who want to talk about design, be inspired by design, but also advocate for design, what we can do with design in the wider culture.
Right. It's amazing when you start to think about design in a broad context, all the things it encompasses. I mean, I guess you could include architecture and landscape architecture as design as well. So if you have a big tent, it could include a lot of different folks in professions that touch on design.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you presented at Advertising Week New York. I'm curious what your session was about for those folks who weren't able to catch it. What were you trying to convey on during that session?
I was a moderator for a session, actually.
Okay.
It was called Branding 101 for SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs. So I was the moderator in conversation with three brand strategists. We had Anna Minkinen, who works at an agency called Loyal Casper, Melanie McShane, who's an independent brand strategist, as well as Ross Clugston, who's the chief creative officer at a studio called Design Bridge and Partners. And so we really talked about the kind of basics of what branding is. There's actually only like a handful of branding related panels and talks at Advertising Week. But we were really focused on the kind of smaller end of things, right? Like small businesses, startups, entrepreneurs who need branding, need brand strategy, and really wanted to give them some tips about where to start, and certainly to start early, even before you're ready for like all the consumer facing stuff like a logo and all of that stuff. You could start with even branding for investors, right? And how do you tell your story? And all of that sort of stuff is also part of branding. It's not just the stuff that we see on packaging for consumer goods, for example.
Right. And given the fact that, you were dealing with SMBs and startups, did you guys cover the fact that often availability of a domain name is sort of critical in the whole naming element, or is that just sort of a given these days that if you can't get the domain name, you probably should try to name yourself something different.
Yeah, we didn't get into like that specific part of naming in the actual panel, but that is a great point in terms of making sure that the domain names are available, maybe looking beyond the .coms, which I know is still prestigious, but there's other top level domains out there these days that are worth looking at. And also just doing some legal review, right? Even if you can get the domain name, you want to make sure you're not going to be getting some lawyer letters after you launch. And then it's way more expensive and way more effort to try to change that once you've put a name out in the world.
Right. Can you think of any startups that came up during the conversation that were sort of a best case scenario where people had done a particularly good job, or did you guys not get into specific brands?
Part of it was that the panelists didn't want to get into like specific projects and brands. Sometimes they're working with early stage startups that aren't kind of public yet, or they had NDAs and things like that. So we're talking more about kind of general strategies to both educate people who be starting the startups, but also for people who have advertising marketing backgrounds to not overlook small businesses and startups. Often these smaller organizations can't afford the big design studio, the big consulting firm, but there's often strategists for hire. Maybe they want to do some moonlighting, freelance work, or you have independents like Melanie, who was on the panel, who are available to do these sort of projects. And so because small businesses represent most of the businesses in the US, I think it was important to make that point as well, beyond just the big tech companies and just the big Fortune 500 companies that often agencies and studios are going after.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm a huge fan of creativity in general and design specifically, because you have to break through the clutter these days. I mean, if whether you're trying to break through the clutter for direct response action or you're trying to convey a brand message, you need to have good creativity and good design. Do you feel like design is underappreciated by marketers?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think maybe to connect it with the previous point, one of the things that came up in the panel was that while, say, small businesses, startups don't have the kind of budgets that big corporations do, the trade-off to that is often you can be more creative as a marketer, right? You can just be maybe weirder to get attention. There's usually a lot less bureaucracy, fewer decision makers, and because there isn't an existing brand, often there's more flexibility there rather than some big Fortune 500 brand. So I think certainly for small businesses and startups, creativity is a big part of it, especially trying to differentiate yourself, right? Like, do we need another, blue logo out in the world for some company? So back to your kind of the core of the question you just asked, though, I think the creative industries, certainly in marketing, advertising, there's still these vestiges of these very 20th century models, from the Mad Men era of this kind of strict distinction that's been breaking down, but we still have these vestiges between like the strategists on one side and the account managers who can talk to clients, and the suits versus the creatives, those weird people that we kind of keep in the back and don't let directly connect with clients. I mean, that's going away, but I think we still have these cultural vestiges of that kind of thing. And I think it's really about reframing it and thinking about, do we treat designers and other creatives as downstream service providers who implement ideas that are being handed to them by the strategists who've come up with the ideas, and the designers are just, the hands to do that? Or are we bringing in designers and other creatives earlier in the process to develop the strategy, to develop the concepts? And there's that kind of collaboration, that dialogue that starts at an earlier point. So I think that second mindset, that second approach, I think is part of what we were trying to advocate for in that panel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the buzzwords that we hear a lot these days about creative and design is also storytelling, and folks forget that there's such a thing as boring stories, right? So not every story that's told is necessarily engaging. And dovetailing in with your earlier point about small businesses having the flexibility to sort of go down a particular path, sometimes creating their own stories or telling their own stories, because there's no longer this requirement that you need to be big enough to buy a TV spot to actually shoot video. Now you could be shooting video that you're going to use in Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. And so small businesses have an opportunity to tell stories there. How does one make sure, either doing it on your own or working with designers and creatives, that the stories you're telling in a marketing context are not boring?
I think there's a lot of different strategies for making sure you're not boring. I think there's some just conceptual things to think about first, and then we can get into maybe a few of the tactical implementations of that. But as you already said in your question, not all stories are interesting, right? There's often boring stories, repetitive stories that brands tell, but also, that your aunt or uncle will mention every Thanksgiving about some embarrassing thing that you did as a kid, right? There's like those kind of stories that, maybe don't need to be repeated. But then there's stories where you're on the edge of your seats, right? Watch a lot of TV. I'm kind of a big nerd, so I'm into these superhero shows and sci-fi shows and stuff like that. And part of why I keep watching them, tuning in every week, is I want to know what happens next, right? And so sometimes you can't do that in a 30-second spot or anything like that. But if you're thinking about social media content, are you leaving the viewers, the audience, wanting more? I think another question to ask is, are you inspiring people to want to share this, right? In terms of just the organic sharing of content, are you inspiring people to maybe make their own content, not necessarily crowdsourcing a campaign, but are you starting sort of a meme or a pattern for, say, TikToks or Instagram Reels that then people kind of start making their own? Example that's coming up for me right now is like those kind of day in the life TikToks where people were doing, like, making their everyday lives look like a Wes Anderson movie, right? So that's not necessarily for a brand. I guess it's good for Wes Anderson's brand, for better or for worse there. But like, they've created a meme essentially that gets replicated. So I think there's the kind of conceptual questions to ask about, like, building suspense, drawing people in for curiosity, giving them a reason to care. So that's also emotional connection. A lot of these are like the bread and butter basics of good marketing and advertising, but just thinking about how we apply them to, other media besides these 30-second spots or print ads, and thinking about them in a more open system, right? Where people aren't just in the audience watching stuff. They can also make their own content or react to it. Like, react videos are a big thing too, right? So like, what makes something worthy of a reaction video?
Right. Those are great points. I would imagine pretty early on in the creative process that one of the decisions that a business owner needs to make, particularly a small business owner, is whether or not for video-based advertising or other forms of advertising, do they essentially want to be the star of that show or not? And we've all seen examples of where they clearly should not have, but they went ahead and did it anyway, potentially with the help of a creative person or without. We don't know necessarily when we see a cringy spot on TV or on social media. And so how should creative teams advise small businesses for that sort of critical decision of who the face of the brand is?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I feel like there's a lot of factors to consider, right? For sometimes with small businesses and with startups, there is the charismatic founder who should be on camera, should be the face of these sort of things. But other times, maybe not, right? I'm kind of thinking about, definitely not a small business, but in terms of, like, Wendy's, when like Dave Thomas was like the face of those ads growing up, right? And so it wasn't like, Wendy was the girl and the logo and the name of the company, but she wasn't actually like in the commercials. So it depends. There's other options too, like mascots, other kind of paid spokespeople, which may be harder to get, obviously, if you're a small business or a startup. But it's worth really thinking that through, right? Or like also thinking about the time commitment. Is it worth the time commitment of the founder, of the CEO to be in these things, even if other people are kind of writing and doing the creative? Still a time commitment, right? To prep for these and be in these. So there's just a lot of factors there, but I think as a general rule, it is really thinking about like, what is the best use of your resources? And also like, what is most authentic, right? Does it matter that the founder is the face of this, or are there maybe better spokespeople for this kind of thing?
Yeah, it just occurred to me that one other option that is sort of becoming available to a small business owner that does have a founder who may or may not be charismatic, or may or may not be the proper face of the brand, is the use of AI to essentially create a digitized version of that individual, not necessarily at the deep fake level, but certainly as a caricature or
Right.
comic style version of themselves. And the level to which that might have been unaffordable before, one could certainly see that happening now, because then you don't have the risk of an external spokesperson. You don't want a Jared/Subway kind of scenario
Right.
where you end up with a spokesperson that ends up tarnishing the brand in the long term. Or you probably don't want a Flow Progressive scenario where, I'm sure every year when she renegotiates her contract, it goes up by several zeros.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, because to some extent, sometimes the brand can make the star. So,
Totally.
did AI come up at all in the conversation as it relates to design and creative?
We had talked about that. I feel like it wouldn't be an advertising week 2023 session without talking about AI. We talked about it in our prep sessions, and then ultimately it didn't come up in our actual panel.
Mhm.
But obviously, I think it's on a lot of people's minds. I think some of the stuff is not ready for prime time yet. You're probably not going to be doing like an entire campaign generated by AI or an entire spot generated by
Right.
AI. But certainly, as like somebody with a practitioner background as a designer, I found it game changing in terms of just helping with the ideation phase, whether it's using like ChatGPT or Bard or other large language models that just like help you generate ideas, maybe getting past the most obvious ones at first, or maybe coming up with ideas you wouldn't have thought of, or maybe helping with copywriting that humans later edit and tweak. And then obviously with the image generators, those are great tools too, where you don't have to have good, say, drawing skills to come up with an idea and maybe use that to communicate with your designer or with a creative director. I think it allows like non-designers to start communicating in visual language more easily, right? By being able to generate stuff and say, like, it's like this, but maybe the color is different, or maybe we changed these things, but it gives you a starting point that's more than zero, more than a blank
Right.
canvas.
Yeah, that's a great point. One luxury that large brands have that perhaps smaller businesses don't have is the large brand can actually come up with segmented creative and messaging for each of their segments, whereas the small brand sort of needs to try to achieve that holy grail, which is, one brand message, one reason to do business with them that resonates against everybody in their target audience. So any tips come up during your sessions about sort of how to refine that what again, they used to call it a unique selling proposition, or that big idea that resonates across your entire target audience?
Yeah. Not sure I remember kind of specific things that came up in the panel itself, but just kind of riffing on your question, I feel like there is something about like leaning into that authenticity that we've been talking about, whether it's like the founder, CEO as a spokesperson, or maybe somebody else, or a cartoon version, as we had also talked about earlier. But I think there's something about, yeah, leaning into the specific, right? I can definitely give you an example of what not to do. When I was running my own studio, I mean, this is like over a decade ago, we did one of those animated explainer videos that was part of a rebranding process for an international organization, like kind of UN type international organization. And one of the things that the client like was really wanted us to do that we couldn't really push back on was all of the people in the animation were blue because of all these cultural sensitivities, because it was about farmers in developing countries. So it's like, what skin tone do these people have? We had to make it blue because that was kind of became a non-negotiable. But stuff like that, I think, it's probably counterproductive today, certainly in terms of like sensibilities. Even if it's a cartoon, there's something about like plausibly real people that maybe actually contribute to the authenticity. On the other end of things, even if you're not able to do different creative that's like trying to reach different targets, you may also think about like different platforms. Again, this is not necessarily a small business example, but I think a lot about Duolingo because I'm a daily user. I think I'm on like 1,500 day streak or something like that. And it like once you're in the actual app, it's pretty friendly to a lot of different kinds of people, from adults to kids and people of different demographics. But if you like look at their Instagram feed, that owl is pretty unhinged in terms of some of the very like, I guess maybe Gen Z, younger millennial focused kind of cultural stuff. And maybe that's a good way of driving a specific audience to the app. But I don't know, from me as a middle-aged user of the app, like it doesn't really matter to me because it's not really for me. So you could also think about it that way, right? It's like stuff will still kind of expand outside of these specific platforms, but maybe you can do more targeted stuff that just is a brand voice within a certain platform, but the core product itself maybe has a more universal appeal.
Yeah, that's a great point. The creative process, sometimes it's an individual coming up with creative, sometimes it's teams coming up with creative, and even if it's an individual that's liaising with the client directly one-on-one, the process has like gone through a lot of changes in the last 5 years. I mean, if you sort of think about there was a lot more face-to-face. Now there's a combination of face-to-face and virtual. I've still found that for particularly creative and strategic projects, that having that face-to-face interaction adds a certain dynamic to the creative process. Is there any evidence that certain types of projects benefit more from face-to-face dynamics, or either in your personal experience or you have a point of view on that?
Right. Yeah, I don't think I have like the scientific data to back it up, but anecdotally, I've seen the trade-offs of both sides. So pre-pandemic, I was doing a lot of in-person facilitation of workshops for ideation and innovation kinds of workshops, design thinking kinds of workshops, which were very in-person, very hands-on, like let's put stuff on Post-its, let's sketch stuff out live in person, and having that dynamic. Obviously, for the last few years, a lot of stuff has gone online. Certainly at AIGA, our team is 100% remote. We only get together if we have a big conference, like what we did in New York earlier this month. But we have other tools like Miro boards or Mural or whichever one you use. Like some of the trade-offs are when you do stuff in person, because it's so analog, you end up having to take pictures of stuff or have somebody take notes or put it in some savable electronic form, which is an extra task, not insurmountable. Certainly if you've got like an intern or a junior person, but if it's like already natively digital in Miro or something, and people are already writing their own Post-its, like it's already there, you can share it. Obviously there's a kind of inclusivity that comes from it, both in terms of allowing people who live far away to be able to participate without having to travel. But there's also kind of a inclusivity for people with maybe different ways of being. Like the in-person stuff certainly benefits the people who are always raising their hands, who are, outspoken in that kind of way, have a certain kind of like in-person performance, which they often bring big ideas. But if you're more introverted, sometimes these online modalities allow different ways to engage, or maybe you can engage quietly, write your notes, or use the chat feature if you're doing this on Zoom to have like a back channel. So again, like thinking about the trade-offs, but maybe we'll find something hybrid that's like the best of both worlds.
Right. Do you think the industry of designers see AI-enabled tools, particularly design tools. Now Adobe has some cool stuff within its latest version, and you've got things like Midjourney, and ChatGPT has a graphical element to that as well in its new version. Do they see that as more of an extra tool in the tool chest, or are they seeing it potentially as competitive?
I think if you are, say, like, I don't know, an illustrator or a photographer, where like primary thing you're selling is your content, there's definitely a lot of fears there. I think for the trained eye, you can still tell if stuff is AI generated, although I think that's going to go away pretty soon. So there's that kind of fear, but then you could also think like, well, maybe the people who are going to be using these AI images weren't going to be commissioning an illustrator or professional photographer anyway, or certainly couldn't pay the rates of somebody like that anyway, whereas the people who can will still want that kind of human touch. I don't know, because that's not the service that I'm selling, but just talking to and listening to illustrators and photographers and folks like that, there's certainly that fear, right? As I mentioned earlier, these tools are great for that ideation concept development process. You know, you can easily make like a mood board with AI generated stuff, or like come up with different copy ideas and then have humans, you know, edit and really make those creative choices there. But certainly for just generating a lot of different ideas and design directions, these tools definitely save a lot of time, you know, even if the final product or the final creative has like nothing AI generated, but that process of getting there was aided by these AI tools.
Right, right. You had mentioned earlier that you just recently had your own conference as well. That while you participated in Advertising Week, you guys had a specific AIGA event. Were there some common themes there that you think would be relevant to folks listening and thinking about design and creative?
Yeah. So the AIG design conference was actually the week before Advertising Week. So I was definitely doing like back-to-back conferences in New York City earlier this month. In terms of themes that came up at the AIGA design conference, I think there's always, for our community, the perennial theme of like, what's just outside of design? Like, what are these other things that we need to know, whether it's about these new AI tools or about designers being more business savvy? I think this has some like real resonance with maybe marketers listening to this, is that we talked earlier about like the old 20th century distinction between, say, the creatives and the strategists, right? But I think there's a lot of demand amongst designers these days who want to learn more about the business side of things. And so their creative choices, their creative work can connect better with these like strategic goals of an enterprise, right? And so some of it is in dialogue with strategists, but some of it is also just designers learning more about the business side of things. So they can also be valued as these kind of earlier thought partners in developing stuff. And then we also have just the topics of ethics as well, which I think can also relate to AI, right? Like citing your sources if you're using AI for something, but also thinking about the unexpected consequences of these new tools because they're so new. I think we've seen some of this stuff with like deep fakes and those potential social consequences, but I don't think we've seen that much yet, you know, and some of it will just kind of play out as these things get deployed more in the world. But that's something that a lot of designers are thinking about for sure.
Right, right. I'd love to get your personal opinion on sort of the creative briefs, right? Because some creative briefs that I've seen are quite long and quite detailed. Others are more of just a framework and used for the purposes of sort of brainstorming and ideation. Do you feel like the end result is determinant on sort of what the original creative brief starts out as, or it really depends on the personalities and skills of the folks executing on a creative brief?
Ooh, I think there's a lot of nuance in that, but I think as a general idea, clients will definitely get the kind of creative that they ask for, right? So if the brief is bad, Or if the brief is maybe too narrowly defined, then you're just asking your designers and other creative teams to essentially be the hands to implement this vision. And
Right.
obviously there's stuff can get lost in translation too. So there's also those kind of communications and relationship kinds of skills that need to come into play. But if the original brief is, I think, too narrow, you're not going to get something particularly innovative.
Mhm.
On the other hand, open briefs are great, but I think creative people also like to have constraints, right? If it's too open-ended, you could be spinning your wheels for a long time as well and not necessarily getting anywhere to break through or innovative either because the brief is too open-ended. So that's the kind of like, I guess, Goldilocks sweet spot of trying to find like how open versus how closed a creative
Right.
brief is. But then obviously there's the skill sets of the people involved as well. I think one of the things that sets sort of more senior designers, creative directors apart from more junior ones is that they know how to reinterpret the brief or to manage the relationship with the clients and say like, okay, well, you said you wanted this in the brief, but maybe we need like a change of scope or a change in how we interpret stuff so we can get somewhere else, right? Because I think that's the perennial dance that we have to do as creative professionals of like, if we just give clients exactly what they want every single time, then it's like, it's too predictable, too boring. I mean, we're kind of asking to be replaced by AI in that sense, right? Or by some cheaper competitor. And so part of what we need to deliver in terms of value is always something like that's obviously follows enough of the directions to be acceptable, but also pushes the envelope enough to sort of warrant us being there and our fees, right? And so that's kind of the perpetual dance there that we need to do. And so that relates to how we shape the brief, but also how we manage our relationships.
Right. And do you feel like things have gotten more collaborative from the perspective of like once the brief has been sort of digested by one or more of the designers or creative directors that now there's sort of this collaboration where it's further refined? Or because I remember 30 years ago it was sort of like the fully baked brief was presented to the creative team and there was maybe a briefing around the brief, but there wasn't a lot of back and forth typically. Whereas I sort of feel like now that it seems more collaborative, and maybe that's just my imagination or the fact that I'm older. But do you feel like that there's more creative collaboration going on than there had been in previous years?
Definitely seeing, again, just anecdotally, a trend in that direction, for sure. And I think the clients that are getting the good creative that's like winning awards or reaching whatever the KPIs, whatever the goals are being more collaborative with their creative teams, whether it's with agencies or in-house creative teams. And I think that's also part of this shift is that while obviously there's still the big agencies out there, we see a lot more companies really investing in their in-house teams as well to supplement that. And so when you have designers to kind of work for you in-house, as well as agencies to help you expand your capabilities, the creative professionals on both sides can have they can speak that same language, they can develop the briefs in that way. So I think that's also helped on the client side because they more and more of them do have more mature creative teams in-house to work with their agencies.
Right. Yeah, I'm wondering if the part of that shift is driven off of the fact that some brands are increasingly, at least for video content, relying on influencers, and influencers generally like a less structured brief. Like they want to know what the objective is, but they don't want to be told exactly what to say. They don't want to be scripted, right? And they want it to be authentic. Hopefully they're on brand and actually want the brand, the product or service, because otherwise it often fails. But the client needs to be comfortable with essentially empowering, if they're going to work with influencers, empowering the influencers to sort of re-articulate the message in that influencer's voice, right? Which is quite different than a command and control mentality, right? And even if it's an internal creative director at an agency having to work with an influencer, there's this dynamic that I think has changed when you start working with an influencer community.
For sure, because I feel like influencers are influencers because they have a successful brand or that resonates with their audience, right? And so essentially you're talking about a brand collaboration where it has to make sense for them to be on brand for whatever your product is. It's like you're going to get better results if it's more integrated into the content that the influencers make versus like, oh, they're going to stop and like, here is the, now they're selling soap in this spot and back to our, back to our scheduled programming. I mean, like you still see that like in YouTube videos and stuff like that. But I feel like the smart partnership, certainly for short form content where, you're not going to stop and do that commercial break, is that sort of integration, right? It has to be true to that brand voice of the influencer, as well as be beneficial to the client, to the brand that's working with the influencer. So that's something to think about for sure.
Right. Well, what has you excited about the next year for yourself or just for the ecosystem at large?
Sure. I mean, I think, I have maybe two things. One is just more sustainable energy stuff and green economy stuff. Certainly that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act that was implemented at the beginning of this year, seeing it just continue in the future, right? And moving the needle on renewable energies and things like that, which is super important. And then in some ways, this is kind of I both look forward to and dread this, which is the ramping up of the 2024 election cycle, because certainly there's a lot of cross-pollination between sort of political campaigns and commercial marketing, in terms of the Venn diagram overlap, in terms of just strategies and storytelling techniques and all of that, right? Whether you're selling a political agenda or selling consumer products, there is that overlap there. So, even if it's going to be a real nail biter, I think there's just going to be interesting stuff to learn from both ends of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. The messaging in the political landscape and political sphere within the next year will be fascinating. We might not always like the direction that it's going, but we'll certainly be learning from it as we experience it.
For sure.
Well, Lee-Sean, thanks for joining me, and it was great to talk about design and creative, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kevin. It was a great conversation.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.